October 26, 1967. The skies above Hanoi are filled with smoke and flak. A squadron of American A-4 Skyhawks roars through the clouds, targeting power plants deep in North Vietnam. Among them is a 31-year-old naval aviator, already carrying the weight of generations of admirals on his shoulders. His name, John McCain. At 10,000 feet, a Soviet-made surface-to-air missile screams upward. In a blinding flash, McCain's jet is torn apart. The cockpit explodes with fire and shrapnel. With seconds to act, he ejects. His body slammed by the force. Both arms break instantly. His right knee shatters. He plummets toward the ground, unconscious. When he hits the water of Truc Bac Lake in Hanoi, he's barely alive. Vietnamese villagers rush toward the wreckage. Some are furious. Others pull him from the water roughly, beating the injured pilot as soldiers drag him to shore. The once proud aviator, who had dreamed of glory in the skies, now lies helpless, a prisoner in a city that will hold him captive for years. Long before John McCain fell from the sky over Hanoi, his life was already tied to the sea. He was born in 1936, not in a small hometown, but on a naval base in the Panama Canal Zone, practically with salt water in his veins. His father, John S. McCain Jr., and his grandfather, John S. McCain Sr., were both Navy admirals. Duty, sacrifice, and command were not just ideals, they were the family legacy. Growing up, John was restless. He wasn't the polished, disciplined son of an admiral that many expected. In school, he was mischievous, rebellious, always testing limits. But beneath the troublemaker's exterior, there was an unshakable pride in the McCain name and a determination to prove himself worthy of it. When it came time for college, there was never a question. John McCain entered the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis, and there his rebellious streak only grew. He graduated near the bottom of his class, not because he lacked ability, but because rules and conformity were chains he constantly tried to break. Still, he earned his commission. He had the bloodline of warriors and the spirit of a fighter. The boy who was always in trouble was about to step into one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, naval aviator. A path that would test not just his skills, but his endurance, his resilience, and ultimately, his will to survive. By the early 1960s, John McCain had earned his wings as a Navy pilot. The rebellious son of admirals was now entrusted with one of the most dangerous machines ever built, the attack aircraft. His assignment: fly from carriers at sea, strike enemy targets, and come back alive. At first, McCain was known more for his daring than for precision. He pushed his planes hard, sometimes too hard, earning a reputation as both fearless and reckless. In fact, he survived several crashes and close calls, incidents that could have ended his career before it truly began. But war was coming, and fate was about to place him exactly where his bloodline seemed destined to be: in combat. In 1967, McCain was deployed to the conflict that dominated headlines and split America in two: the Vietnam War. Operating from the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal, he flew dangerous low-level bombing runs against heavily defended targets in North Vietnam. It was a perilous task. Anti-aircraft fire and Soviet-supplied missiles filled the skies, waiting for pilots like McCain. Each mission was a gamble with death. Yet, every time he launched, he did so with the weight of family legacy and personal duty pressing on his shoulders. The restless troublemaker from Annapolis was now in the cockpit of a Skyhawk jet, carrying thousands of pounds of explosives, and with them, the burden of expectation. The war was calling, and McCain was answering. July 29, 1967. The USS Forrestal, one of the largest aircraft carriers in the world, prepared for another day of bombing missions against North Vietnam. Its deck was crowded with aircraft loaded with fuel and live ordnance. Pilots, including John McCain, were strapped into their cockpits, engines roaring, but in an instant, everything turned to hell. A misfired rocket from another jet streaked across the deck, slamming into McCain's Skyhawk. The explosion triggered a chain reaction. Bombs, rockets, and fuel ignited in a storm of fire and death. McCain scrambled out of his burning jet as flames engulfed the deck. Seconds later, the plane exploded, sending shrapnel tearing through the air. Pilots and sailors who had rushed forward to fight the blaze were incinerated as more ordnance detonated. For nearly a day, the Forrestal burned. The inferno claimed 134 lives and injured more than 160 others. It was one of the worst naval disasters since World War II. John McCain had narrowly escaped death, but the images of charred bodies, exploding bombs, and shipmates lost would haunt him forever. That day, he realized that war was not just about missions and duty. It was about survival and sacrifice. The restless young pilot had come face to face with mortality, and yet his war was only beginning. October the 26th, 1967. John McCain climbed into his A-4 Skyhawk for what should have been just another bombing mission over North Vietnam. His target, a power plant in the heart of Hanoi. But this mission was different. Hanoi was one of the most heavily defended cities on Earth. Anti-aircraft guns, radar-guided missiles, and swarms of enemy fire blanketed the skies. McCain knew the odds, but he pressed on. As he rolled into his attack dive, a Soviet-made surface-to-air missile screamed through the sky and struck his jet. The explosion ripped the aircraft apart. Shrapnel tore into his body, breaking his arms and his right leg. With flames engulfing his plane, McCain ejected. The force of the ejection shattered him even further, and he fell unconscious as he plunged into a lake in the center of Hanoi. When he hit the water, he came to. His gear dragged him under, his limbs broken. Drowning seemed certain, but he managed to pull himself up, only to be surrounded by an angry mob of North Vietnamese who pulled him from the lake, beat him severely, and delivered him to prison guards. John McCain had gone from fighter pilot to prisoner of war in the space of minutes. He was only 31 years old, and the nightmare of the Hanoi Hilton had just begun. The prison they dragged John McCain into was officially called Hoa Lo, but American POWs gave it a darker name, the Hanoi Hilton. Behind its crumbling walls, the air stank of rot, sweat, and despair. McCain arrived broken, both arms fractured, his legs shattered, ribs crushed. He was barely clinging to life. The guards had no intention of saving him. They left him for days in a filthy cell, feeding him scraps, withholding medical care. But when they discovered who he was, the son of Admiral John S. McCain, one of the highest-ranking men in the U.S. Navy, everything changed. Not with mercy, but with leverage. To them, McCain was a bargaining chip. They offered him freedom, immediate release. He could have walked out of that prison as a propaganda victory for North Vietnam, but John refused. He told them, "I will only leave if every man captured before me leaves too." That decision condemned him to years of torment, beatings, rope torture, endless isolation. He was hung by his broken arms until he lost consciousness, over and over again. They tried to break him, body and spirit, but McCain endured. And in the darkest nights of his captivity, he found strength in solidarity. Other POWs tapped messages through the walls, creating a secret code of hope. They were more than prisoners. They were brothers in survival. After refusing early release, John McCain became a prime target for brutal treatment. For years, his days blended into a cycle of pain, isolation, and psychological torment. His body grew frail, but his defiance only sharpened. To survive, McCain clung to small acts of resistance. POWs passed messages with the tap code, scratched secret notes on scraps of paper, and found ways to encourage one another. In the face of humiliation, solidarity became their shield. McCain would later say that the most important lesson of captivity was this: no man fights alone. Every prisoner who endured those dark years drew strength from the others, even when they couldn't see each other's faces. In March 1973, after more than 5 years in captivity, McCain was finally released as part of Operation Homecoming. He was carried out on crutches, bones still unhealed, body scarred forever. Reporters captured images of his return, but what couldn't be photographed was the willpower that had kept him alive. He came home not as a broken man, but as a living testament to endurance. a man who had chosen honor over comfort, sacrifice over self-preservation, and that choice would define the rest of his life. Back on American soil, John McCain faced a new battle. One fought not against an enemy army but against his own body. Years of captivity had left him broken, his arms barely usable, his leg permanently damaged, his body scarred inside and out. Doctors told him he would never fly again, that his injuries were too severe for a return to service. But McCain refused to accept a life defined by limitation. With relentless rehabilitation, he pushed himself through pain most men could not endure. Against all odds, he regained enough strength to return to active duty in the Navy. He couldn't raise his arms above his head, but he refused to let that stop him from serving. For McCain, duty was not about perfection of the body. It was about commitment of the soul. Beyond the uniform, the public began to see him as more than a survivor. He was a man who had walked through hell, carried scars with pride, and emerged with a deeper sense of purpose. His story resonated far beyond military circles, hinting at a future where his fight would move from the battlefield to the political arena. By the late 1970s, John McCain faced a new mission. His days in uniform were behind him, but the fire of service still burned inside. He had lived through war, endured captivity, and returned with scars that told a story America could not ignore. In 1982, he stepped onto a different battlefield: politics. Running for Congress in Arizona, McCain built his campaign not on promises of ease, but on his story of sacrifice and resilience. Voters saw in him a man who had already proven his loyalty to the country in the harshest crucible imaginable. He won that election, and just 4 years later claimed a seat in the U.S. Senate. In Washington, McCain earned a reputation quickly: stubborn, independent, and unwilling to bow to party lines. He became known as the Maverick, a senator who followed his conscience, even when it cost him politically. From the halls of Congress to the Senate floor, McCain's voice carried the weight of experience few others could match. He wasn't just another politician. He was a man who had walked through fire and lived to tell the tale, and he demanded a politics worthy of that sacrifice. In the 1990s and 2000s, John McCain's name became known far beyond Arizona. He was no longer just a senator. He was a national figure. His fiery independence in Washington earned him the nickname the Maverick. McCain took strong stands, often against his own party. He pushed for campaign finance reform, fought against wasteful government spending, and demanded accountability in foreign policy. His voice was sharp, his words carried weight, and his reputation for honesty won him respect on both sides of the aisle. But McCain's ambitions didn't stop at the Senate. Twice, he ran for President of the United States. In 2000, he clashed with George W. Bush in a bitter Republican primary, capturing the nation's attention with his straight talk and refusal to play politics as usual. Then, in 2008, he secured the Republican nomination, facing Democrat Barack Obama in a historic election. The campaign was grueling. McCain's age and health were questioned, and the economic crisis loomed large. But he fought with the same determination that had once kept him alive in a prison cell. Even in defeat, his concession speech was remembered for its grace, humility, and call for unity. For McCain, politics was never about party lines alone. It was about service, integrity, and putting country before self. He wasn't perfect, and he knew it. But through every speech, every vote, every campaign, he carried with him the scars of Hanoi, a reminder that freedom was worth every sacrifice. In his later years, John McCain became more than just a senator. He became a symbol. He clashed with presidents of both parties, never shying away from speaking his mind. Whether on foreign policy, national security, or the values of American democracy, McCain's voice carried the authority of someone who had lived sacrifice, not just spoken about it. In 2017, he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, an aggressive brain cancer. It was the toughest fight of his life, but McCain faced it with the same grit he had shown in the skies over Vietnam and in the prison cells of Hanoi. Even while undergoing treatment, He returned to the Senate floor to cast critical votes, defiantly standing tall despite his failing health. When he passed away in August 2018 at the age of 81, the nation paused. Political allies and rivals alike honored him, recognizing a life defined not by perfection, but by courage, resilience, and service. He was laid to rest at the U.S. Naval Academy Cemetery, the final resting place of a man who had lived as a warrior, a prisoner, a senator, and, above all, a servant of his country. John McCain's legacy is not only in laws or campaigns, but in the example he left behind. That honor matters, that sacrifice matters, and that love of country sometimes demands everything. John McCain's life was never about ease or comfort. It was about struggle, sacrifice, and service. From the skies over Vietnam to the dark cells of Hanoi, from the Senate floor to the final days of his battle with cancer, he lived as a man defined not by what was taken from him, but by what he gave back. He was far from perfect. He admitted his flaws, owned his mistakes, and carried them alongside his triumphs. But perhaps that is what made his story so powerful. He was human, scarred, stubborn, relentless, and yet he never stopped serving. John McCain reminds us that greatness is not about never falling, but about rising again when the world tries to break you. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear dictate your choices. And that honor is not a word spoken, but a life lived. From a broken pilot in a prison cell, to a senator who stood his ground, to a voice that called America to be better than its divisions. McCain's legacy endures as a reminder that service to something greater than yourself is the highest calling. So when history remembers him, it will not be for titles or elections. It will be for the simple truth that John McCain lived and died as he once declared of himself, "I am a man of the Navy. I am a man of honor." Did you enjoy this story? Then make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below which story you'd like to see next. Together, we'll keep uncovering how ordinary men, through courage and conviction, wrote extraordinary chapters of history.